In the bone-dry autumn of 1834, a farmhouse outside Rowan County, Kentucky, rang with two newborn cries that refused to separate. The midwife swore she'd delivered two boys, but what drifted up from their tiny chests was one breath, braided and shared, a sound like wind searching for a door. The father crossed himself. The mother turned the mirror to face the wall. By sunup, the county doctor had written a single line in his ledger that he later scratched out with the butt of his pen: "Two hearts debate the same life." Before we step into this archive-sealed case, before we open doors local families nail shut every winter, do one thing for me. Tap subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a night like this. Histories like the one you're about to hear, buried under floorboards, misfiled by trembling hands, denied by men who knew better, deserve the light. And tell me in the comments what state you're listening from. Every county has a story it won't speak above a whisper. Maybe yours does too. Now, let's go back to 1834, a year cholera bit Wells and the New Madrid fault went quiet the way a dog goes quiet before it bites. The Harper place sat where the road thinned to a ribbon of dust and sycamore roots lifted the earth like knuckles. The midwife was Honora Keene, a small woman with a larger silence, who insisted on placing a shallow tin basin beside the birthing bed. She poured spring water into it, then slid a hand mirror at the bottom, face up. "Old remedy," she muttered, breath ghosting the glass. "If the first gasp won't come, fetch the second from its reflection." It worked. It worked too well. The boys arrived with a rule the adults refused to learn. If one slept, the other's eyes stayed open. If one startled, the other soothed. If one laughed, both lights flickered. By noon, their mother had wrapped them in the same shawl without thinking, and the shawl warmed like a living stove. When their father tried to separate them for a moment, one to the rocker, one to the cradle, the rocker tipped by itself, righted itself, and drifted 2 inches toward the cradle as if the floor wanted them touching. The midwife drew a small circle in ash on the basin's rim and said nothing at all. Word traveled. In those days word walked, but it always got where it was going. The circuit preacher, Reverend Silas Ward, arrived with a Bible too heavy for its owner. He thumbed to Psalms and never found it. "Twins are the Lord's joke," he declared, trying to make it sound like comfort. "When the Lord laughs, we echo." The doctor, Lucius Bellamy of Lexington, young enough to worship instruments, old enough to scowl at superstition, unpacked a case of gleaming brass and glass that made the boys stare as if a new sunrise had been invented just for them. He listened. He tapped. He frowned. Then he listened again, this time with his cheekbone resting lightly against one boy's sternum. He lifted his head slow. "They're trading," he said, to no one in particular. "Pulse, breath, heat. They pass it like a cup." He suggested fresh air, separate cradles, and no mirrors in the room. The midwife's mouth went thin. "No mirrors in the room," she repeated, but it sounded like a warning, not a prescription. By the 4th night, the wind changed. The sycamores rattled without moving. The basin in the pantry trembled where it sat, its water winking at a ceiling with no reason to shine. At midnight, both twins woke at once and spoke their first word. Not mama, not papa, but 13. They said it in the kind of harmony that makes dogs leave porches. Nobody in the room counted. Nobody asked, 13 what? In the morning, a girl from the nearest farm brought bread the family didn't want and gossip the family couldn't afford. "Saw the spring run backwards," she whispered in the kitchen doorway, eyes on the floor. "Water climbing over itself like fish. Only does that when a storm's coming or a wish got granted wrong." Her words made the midwife tip the basin and watch the water's skin roll a second too late, as if time itself were off by a beat. "Separate them," the doctor insisted, setting one cradle at the parlor window and the other near the stove. "We must test the influence." He was a man who could make cruelty sound like a measurement. The mother obeyed and sat on the rug between them, hands on both edges of the world. For a half hour, peace pretended to settle. Then the hearth bricks warmed without a fire. The glass of the window frosted without cold. The clock on the mantel sighed and stopped. One twin hiccuped. The other smiled and rubbed his own chest. "Enough," the mother said. She lifted one boy, then the other, tucking them back under the same shawl. The clock started on the very next heartbeat, eager as a dog that knows what's expected. "I have delivered a dozen sets," Americana murmured, almost to herself. "Half become two. Half remain, what they are. It depends on the mirror." She didn't explain what that meant. She drew the curtains and blew out the parlor lamp. The doctor watched the smoke twist into a figure eight and hated it a little for doing tricks. Days lengthened. The county learned to be polite to a fact it could not change. Schoolchildren brought small questions with their apples. Do they share dreams? Sometimes. Do they swap hurts? Ask them tomorrow. Do they know who's who? They don't seem to care. The twins grew plump on milk and attention, uncanny in the ordinary ways babies are, except when they weren't. Once, the father pricked his finger on a fishhook and both boys cried, one with tears, one without. Once, lightning took a sycamore on the ridge, fusing sand into a puckered glass stone. The next morning the boys woke with grit under their nails. Then the sickness came up the road. Cholera, blue death, the kind that taught you how fast water can be worse than thirst. The Reverend said it was judgment. The doctor said it was filth. The midwife said it was the well punishing the bucket. The twins, too young to understand a plague, began a ritual no one taught them. One would press his damp handkerchief to the other's lips and breathe in. The other would cough up a thread of clear water, though he'd had none. "Stop," their mother begged. "Don't trade sickness." They didn't listen. Children never do when the law in their bodies is older than language. On the worst night of that month, when the neighbors hammered black cloth over their windows and wagons rattled past with no lamps lit, the twins fell asleep apart for the first time. The doctor had dosed them with laudanum measured in drops you'd need a saint's patience to count. Midnight came like a door closing. The house listened to itself breathe. The mother lay awake, eyes on the dark seam under the pantry door where the basin waited. Somewhere between 1 hour and the next, something tapped the tin. Once, twice, 13 times. Both boys sat straight up in their separate cradles and turned their heads toward the pantry without using their eyes. In the warm black, they spoke together in a voice not yet theirs, under the white sink. Then they lay back down, hands open as if expecting payment. At dawn the doctor pried up the plank beneath the washstand. Wrapped in oilcloth lay a second mirror, its back painted pitch black, its face smeared with ash and something finer than ash, the way grief is finer than grief. He carried it into the yard. Sunlight fell on the glass and did not come back out. For a breath's length, the reflection showed two boys, but one face, staring up at him from inside the black. Then the surface misted from within, silvering over like a wound trying to scar. "Throw it," the Reverend said, failing to make it a prayer. "Don't," said Americana, and though her voice was soft, it bent every ear in the yard. "Mirrors don't like being surprised." The doctor held the thing the way a man holds his own name. The mother scooped both boys into her shawl and refused to look at the glass again. When night returned, it came faster than it should have, as if it had been waiting in the trees for permission. Coyotes yipped where coyotes had no business being. Someone's mule tore its halter and ran. In the Harper house, every lamp wick flowered black. The twins did not cry. They did not sleep. They stared at the pantry door and breathed in a slow, braided rhythm you could march an army to if you were the wrong kind of man. At the 13th breath, the basin trembled. Snow came early that year, fat flakes that fell without wind, as if lowered carefully from a white ceiling. The day it stuck, Dr. Silas Pike turned the back room of his apothecary into a laboratory and locked the door. He hung a compass from a thread of Nora's hair and set a galvanometer on the counter like an idol. He'd sent letters, quietly, to a medical society in Boston, to a phrenologist in Cincinnati, to a mesmerist whose newspaper pamphlets he despised but couldn't stop reading. He'd written, 1 pulse, 2 bodies, 1 startle, 2 flinches, the same wound where it was never given. What is this? Ezra carried the girls in. Martha reached for the compass and the needle swung hard east, then west, then froze, trembling as if braced against a storm no one could feel. Mercy laughed, and the wire in Pike's galvanometer quivered. Nothing touched it. No lay jar hummed. The doctor's mouth thinned. He pricked Martha's thumb with a lancet and Mercy hissed, tears bright. Blood swelled on Martha's skin. On Mercy's, nothing. He pressed a strip of paper to Mercy's untouched thumb anyway, and a perfect print bloomed on the paper where there should have been none. Wells' needed stitching. Transfer without contact, Pike wrote, or else naming the wrong thing. Temperance Hale watched from the doorway, shawl drawn tight. They're not haunted, she said to the doctor when Ezra took the girls to the front for horehound candy. They are unfinished. How do you mean? Pike asked. Temperance glanced at the tin mirror on the shelf, where Mercy's image lagged and then snapped to match her like a soldier falling into line. Like a loaf pulled too soon, she said. Still soft in the middle. Not 1. Not 2. Something else. Reverend Wilkes wrestled with a different vocabulary for the same terror. He lit 2 candles on his study table and set one before each child. Mercy's flame guttered and Martha's danced, then both steadied as if following the same breath. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, he said, pacing. But the Lord made an order. Here, he held up a paperweight from his desk, a glass sphere that bent the light. You see how one thing can be many. Martha reached for it. Mercy did not. Yet the glass ball in Martha's hand clouded as if filled with milk, and from the middle of it Wilkes swore he saw another set of tiny hands pushing outward from the inside, like something wanting out. The town bent around the girls. Dogs stopped barking when they passed, ears flattening, then trotted behind as if recalled by a whistle only they could hear. A cracked bell at the blacksmith's that hadn't rung a true note in years gave a clean C when Mercy laughed, a low A when Martha cried. And somewhere beneath the frost, a sound began, a hum threaded through limestone and the church foundation and the iron nails in the pews. The cave country was waking up. They called it Widow Shore Sink, a slit in the earth where a tulip poplar had fallen 50 years before, revealing a black throat and a breath cool as a cellar. Boys dared boys to throw stones into it. Men swore they'd gone down with torches and come back with faces pale as flour, saying they'd heard a second echo answer their own, not repeating but replying. The sheriff had hauled stones to cover the mouth after a calf vanished. But Ezra took the twins to the ridge anyway, following a deer path through cedar and sumac, Temperance walking behind with a jar of pickled eggs for the girls, Reverend Wilkes moving slower, carrying a Bible and a knot in his stomach. Listen, Mercy said on the ridge, head cocked. I don't hear nothing, Ezra said. She does, Martha whispered. Her eyes watered in the cold. It's singing like the clock. It wants us to match. Pike, who had insisted on coming though he hated the damp, set his instruments on the rock, the compass, the galvanometer, a fork he could tune and lay against stone. He plucked the fork and was about to press it to the limestone when the twins both bent and laid their palms flat on the frozen ground. The needle seized, pointing not north but down. The fork's tones swelled without his touch. Pike did what men do when faced with a thing bigger than their words. He tried a smaller word. Resonance, he said, and when he looked up, Mercy's eyes had gone unfocused, and Martha's had gone too focused, like she was listening to one voice in a crowd and growing angry at the rest. Ezra pulled them up and away from the stones, heart hammering, and that night the 13th chime came again from the church bell, thin and quick as a hiccup, and Wilkes fell to his knees because he had not set the bell to ring at all. Boston answered. A telegram would have been blasphemy to the wires. This was still the age of letters delivered by men whose coats smelled like river wind. So a fortnight later a stranger arrived by packet boat and then by a lurching hire wagon, a gentleman with a red scarf and a travelling trunk rubbed smooth at the corners. He introduced himself in the apothecary with a little bow and a flourish of cards, Professor Aldous Larkin, lecturer on animal magnetism and the invisible sympathies. Pike did not hide his distaste. Animal magnetism is a parlor game. And yet, Larkin said mildly, your compass points to babies. He did not unpack snake oil. He unpacked precision, a spinning top balanced on a fine pin, a slate and chalk, 2 blindfolds sewn of black silk, a metronome, French work, with a pendulum that swung with tiny huffs of sound like a sleeping animal. He set the metronome on the apothecary counter and let it count. Tick, tick, tick. The twins' breathing fell into step with it. Martha exhale on tick, Mercy inhale on tick, as if the sound had been attached to their ribs. Separate them, Larkin said. Ezra balked. Nora said no. Temperance said she'd sooner stand in a lightning storm with a pitchfork. Pike, who had read about control groups, cleared his throat and nodded. So Larkin marked 2 spots on the plank floor with chalk, 6 strides apart, and placed each girl on her mark. Blindfolds down. Hands in laps. Now, he told Mercy, I will show your sister a picture. You draw what she sees. He held up a child's drawing card for Martha, a square with a crooked triangle on top. A house as any child would know it. The room watched Mercy. She drew a line, stopped, fumbled, drew a second line. What came out wasn't a house. It was the fork of a river. Larkin didn't smile. He held up a circle with spokes, a wheel. Martha tilted her head. Mercy drew a circle, then a smaller one within it, then a ring of dots around the outer edge as if she were labeling the phases of the moon. Not picture, Mercy said softly, though she could not see. Place. Larkin's hand trembled. He reset the metronome slower. Tick, tick, tick. The twins' breaths tried to follow, stumbled, then found the new pace. Their pulses followed, too. Pike felt for both arteries with both hands and went white. They entrain, he said. Change one, change both. Not both, Mercy whispered. All. Larkin went still. All what? She didn't answer. Martha did, voice flat. All of my heart in her chest. All of hers in mine. Like a mirror that learned how to bleed. They tried touch. Larkin brushed a feather along Martha's forearm. Mercy's skin rose in goose flesh. They tried taste. Larkin placed a drop of bitter tincture on Mercy's tongue. Martha gagged, and for one quick, terrifying second her heartbeat tumbled out of rhythm under Pike's fingers, as if the bitterness had slipped between the gears of a clock and jammed them. Pike slapped the metronome faster. The heart righted. Martha blinked, sweat filming her lip, and Temperance Hale said, too loudly, enough. Larkin was not cruel. He was hungry. He asked Ezra for 1 hour more. Ezra gave him 30 minutes. The last experiment was no trick. 2 silhouettes cut in black paper, like what a traveling artist might do at a fair, 1 for each child. Larkin held the lamp so the girls' profiles showed sharp against a hanging cotton sheet. He traced Martha's nose and chin. The scissorman's art was the only camera Kentucky had then. He moved the lamp and traced Mercy's. When he lowered the sheet, both cutouts were the same. Of course they were. They were twins, but the edges had a peculiar feathering, as if each small motion had wavered for a breath, and in that waver something else had leaned in, almost but not quite the same, and then pulled back. What does it mean? Reverend Wilkes asked, hands tied on his hat. Larkin stared at the metronome, at the needles, at the twins at last asleep on the counter as if the tick had worn them out. He wanted to say quantum, but the word had not been minted yet. He wanted to say phase lock, but that language belonged to engineers unborn. He settled on the only honest thing. It means, he said, that what we call 1 is not the smallest number we know. That night, the bell tolled a 13th time at 4:06, though no rope was pulled, and the town's milk soured in every kitchen. Someone with a fiddle tried a reel in the tavern, and every 4th note came out double. Lightning skated low across the pasture fence without thunder, as if auditioning for some job the sky had not yet offered it. The hum under the hills grew louder, and those who slept heard the same dream. A cool hand pressed over their eyes, and a girl's voice sang, very gently, "I'm going to borrow you." They took the twins to the ridge again because Mercy asked and Martha did not object, and Ezra would have followed them into the river if it meant they would stop looking past him at a thing he could not see. Widow Shaw's sink had been freshly stoned over by order of the magistrate, flat as a grave, but stones are only a suggestion to the earth. The frost had heaved one corner up, and through the crack came a breath so cold it singed the hairs in the nose. "Stand here," Mercy said, putting the toe of her shoe on the lifted stone. "No farther," Ezra warned. "No farther," Martha echoed, obedient and not. Larkin watched like a man at a curtain, waiting for the stage to light. The twins fixed their eyes on nothing and everything. The hum in the rock, because it was in the rock, not the air, shifted key, then split, then resolved. Larkin put the tuning fork to the stone, and it sang until his teeth hurt. "Do you hear words?" he asked. It came out a whisper. He was not a praying man, but the sink made every voice small in the throat, a chapel with the altar below. Martha nodded. Mercy shook her head. Then Mercy said, "She hears words." "What kind of words?" "The kind you answer." Larkin swallowed. "Answer one." Mercy put her hand flat on the stone. Martha flinched like she'd touched a stove. The wind died entirely, the trees went still, and in that silence the stone groaned like a door pulled open with reluctance. The air went warmer, not colder. The smell was not the usual cave musk. It was rain on chalk. Lime. Clean and wrong. What did it say? Reverend Wilkes asked, pale. Mercy cocked her head. It asked, "Which of you is the first?" "And what did you answer?" Martha, voice no louder than a breath. "We don't know." Larkin was shaking now, not from fear but from the realization that he had just witnessed a new species of question. He thought of electricity, of telegraphs, of twins as a wire strung through air. He hated himself for thinking of fame. He loved himself for thinking of proof. "Step back," he said, voice even. "That's enough. Please." They stepped back. The hum sank to a lower register. The stone settled, meek as a cow. Ezra picked both girls up at once and felt the strain in his back and welcomed it. The ache was simple. He understood it. He carried them home along the trace while Larkin and Pike bickered softly about terms that neither believed but both needed. Fluids, ethers, signatures. Temperance Hale walked with her hands tucked into her shawl, fingers working the fringe like a rosary. Wilkes kept his own counsel and stared at his boots and wondered if he had been ministering to a town or a wound. That evening, Ezra knocked a board loose from the kitchen floor because the Foxfire glow had come again, seeping up like swamp gas, and he was too tired to pretend he didn't see it. Under the board lay a little cavity in the hard dirt and, in it, a marble. Not the common clay shooter boys carried, but glass, clear, with a twist of white frozen in it like a flake of snow. He turned it in his hard palm. "From the corner," Martha said. "Careful." Mercy said, "It rolls." He set it down. It rolled toward Martha and stopped. He nudged it the other way. It rolled toward Mercy and stopped. Ezra pushed harder, jaw set. The marble spun between the twins' feet as if caught in the shallow bowl of a force that had nothing to do with his hand. He put the board back and nailed it. Some doors only make sense closed. Winter bit down. The river went to iron. Men burned fence rails to keep their children's hands from going grey at the knuckles. There is a particular quiet that comes over a town in that weather. The hush of breath turned to steam, of boots not squeaking because the cold has made every leather sound. Into that quiet came a sound that did not belong, a soft tick that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, like a spider's foot on paper magnified to fill the room. Tick, tick, tick. It had no source. It faded when men cocked their heads, returned when they gave up. Temperance found the tick strongest where the twins slept. She set a candle at their feet and watched the flame shiver and lean in time with the sound. "What are you timing?" she asked. "Us," Mercy said, not waking. "Not us," Martha said. "The space between." Dr. Pike tried to capture the tick with ink. He rigged a paper drum, borrowed from a millwright, and a pen, set the pen trembling, set the drum spinning, and put it near the cradle. The line the pen traced was not the even up and down of a metronome, but a braid. 2 waves crossing, touching, pulling apart, touching again. He stared until his eyes blurred and saw, in the stuttering of the ink, a kind of language. He did not know how to read it. He suspected he was the wrong century. The first death came a week before Epiphany. Not the twins. Mr. Hobie, the schoolmaster, had trudged home from the church barn where the big stove lived, fallen into his chair, and sighed. His wife found him with his eyes open and his lips blue. At the exact minute his heart stilled, the church bell gave a short, dry thud, half a chime, as if a hand had tugged and then let go. The next morning, men found, on the frost of the bell rope, 2 small handprints side by side, melted deep as if something warm had held on for the length of a prayer. "Coincidence," someone said. "Consequence," Temperance answered. Reverend Wilkes went to the Baines house with his Bible open to the Psalms. He meant to comfort. He meant to bless. He held his hand over the girls' heads and felt a tingle in his palm as if he'd put it too near a hearth. "Do you know what happens when Mr. Hobie dies?" he asked, voice careful. Martha thought. Mercy did not. "A bell breaks," she said. "How do you know that, child?" "It rang inside us first." Mercy pointed to her chest. "Then it went up to the church so the town could hear it, too." Pike, who had not slept, who had begun to fear mirrors and puddles and polished spoons because sometimes they showed a third thing where there ought to be only 2, said, "We have to stop measuring in one direction. We have to measure the returns." "What returns?" Ezra asked. "The ones from the cave," Pike said. He regretted it the moment it left his mouth because Ezra's shoulders sagged like a man bracing for a second blow. They went anyway. Widow Shaw's sink in snow was a blacker black. The stone cap had tilted further, just enough to fit a hand. Mercy slid hers into the crack and hissed at the cold. Martha cried out and shook her fingers as if she'd been stung. "Don't," Ezra snapped, too sharp, and both girls jerked their hands back in unison. The hum rose and sharpened. There is a note a saw can make when it bites a nail. Metal on metal, teeth complaining. The air took on that edge. Larkin closed his eyes and breathed through his mouth and whispered, "Forgive me," to a god he had previously ignored. "What does it want?" Wilkes asked. Mercy tilted her head, as if listening to a second room. "It wants us to finish," she said. "Finish what?" Martha, eyes wide and dry, being the same. When the thaw came early, it didn't come kindly. Ice went from glass to knife to slush in a day, and the mill pond groaned as if a whale were turning under the surface. The town shook off its coats, and the children ran, and someone shouted, and Mercy went through the skin of the pond like a spoon through cream. Ezra was there. Temperance was there. Pike was there by the mercy of a habit that made him walk toward sound instead of away. Men threw ropes. Women screamed. Mercy didn't. She hung in the gap like a drop star, eyes open, hair blooming around her head, reaching not up but out with slow, deliberate strokes, as if she were feeling her way down a hallway narrower than her hands. Martha, on the bank, went white to the lips and began to shake. Not sobbing. Not fainting. Shaking like a wire drawn tight. Frost bloomed on the hairs of her arms. Her breath came in short plumes. "Cold," she said, teeth clicking, and Temperance understood in a way that felt like blasphemy. She stripped off her shawl and threw it around Martha and shoved her toward Pike. "Listen to me," Temperance said, voice not loud but carrying. "I know what's happening. Do what you do to one and you do to the other. Warm one, warm both. If you let the one in the water go, the one on land will drown in the air." Pike threw his coat around Martha. He slapped his own cheeks. He forced his own breath slower until hers matched. On the pond, Mercy's fingers found a root under the lip of the ice and held, and men hauled, and the world resumed its regular shape inch by inch. When they dragged her out and laid her on the planks, she coughed once and then smiled. Martha coughed once and smiled the same smile with chattering teeth and then burst into tears. Pike opened his little kit with the lancet and the leeches, not because they were right, but because he was a doctor and he needed to do, not watch. He pricked Mercy's heel to draw off a little blood and ease the pounding in her head. Blood welled. He put pressure. He turned to put away the lancet and, God forgive him, his hand shook and he nicked Martha's heel, too. Mercy cried out and clutched at her own foot. Pike looked at the 2 drops of red, identical in color and size, beating on 2 different skins. He put the lancet down very carefully and walked away and stood with his forehead against the church wall until the stone bled its cold into his bones. He was a fair man, not a holy one. He had been given a wonder and instead of, or he felt grievance. That night, Ezra barred the door and shoved a chest against it and sat in the kitchen with a shotgun across his knees while Nora slept with one palm on each girl's hair. Outside, men with opinions that always roared at the wrong time argued in the yard about curses and exorcisms and what kind of rope it might take to separate fate from flesh. Reverend Wilkes scattered them with a few words, voice hoarse, and then he sat on Ezra's step and wept where no one could see. The day after the thaw, Temperance brought candles. Not tall church tapers, stubs of beeswax she'd kept from christenings and deathbeds, ends she'd melted together to make new lights, the way a life sometimes makes another out of its scraps. She set one at Mercy's head and one at Martha's feet and lit them both and told Ezra no matter what happened, no one was to blow. She put a saucer of salt on the table and a saucer of sugar and watched to see which one drew damp in the girl's presence. Both did. They have a weather, she said. What in God's name does that mean? Pike snapped, exhausted. Temperance turned one candle. The flame leaned toward the other, not away from the draft, but as if reaching for its cousin's heat. It means there are rules. We just don't know whose. She clipped a lock of hair from each girl, wrapped them in separate paper twists, and set them on opposite ends of the table. She marked the table with her thumbnail and scolded Ezra with a glance when he opened his mouth to protest. They all watched. For a long time, nothing. Then the 2 little paper twists shivered, inched, pivoted, and, in a motion that made the skin of everyone in the room rise, slid toward one another until their edges touched and lay still. Pike wrote, then crossed out what he'd written, then wrote again. Not contagion. Not trick. Some third thing that punishes separation. A letter came from Spain. No one explained how it found them. A packet of thin paper written in an elegant hand by a physician who had read of Mesmer but did not worship him, who attached a draft of a treatise on gemelo singulars, singular twins, with case notes on 2 sisters born in Valencia who had died on the same afternoon in separate towns, one of a fever and one of fright. He asked for data. He asked for drawing of ear shapes, for measurements of skulls, for exact dates of lunar phases. Pike put the letter on the mantel where it stayed until the end. The fused shadow returned on a night of Farksfy. Ezra had gone out to the orchard to relieve himself, grateful to be alone in the cold with a simple task. When he came back through the kitchen, he stopped dead and called Nora softly and then not softly at all. On the far wall, in the light of a single candle, a shadow stretched that was not the shadow of anything in the room. It had the twins' heads, yes, but where their hand should have been was a single hand with too many fingers, and where their feet should have been was one foot, like the hind foot of a deer, cleft and wrong. It pulsed like breath. It did not fade when Ezra moved the candle. It only faded when the girls woke, yawned, sat up, and turned their faces toward each other. The shadow thinned and, with the smallest sound, snapped, like threads pulled tight and cut at once. Dreams lay over Ashford Hollow like a fog. Men woke with the taste of iron on their tongues and could not say why. Women found their cooking spoons bent into little arcs as if they'd been used to pry up something heavy. Children woke in the same posture, one hand reaching toward the wall, one curled against the chest, without knowing they were mimicking the twins' mirror sleeps. Even the animals felt it. A mare in the livery stamped and snorted when the church bell heaved its 13th sigh, then calmed when Mercy laughed upstairs, as if the laugh had reached under and soothed the animal's heart. Reverend Wilkes declared a fast. He had been generous with Mercy, and now he reached for discipline because it was what he knew how to hold. "We will empty ourselves," he said from the pulpit, eyes rimmed red. "We will make space for God to put us back in order." He asked families to lay bread on the church steps as alms. He asked for quiet, which the town interpreted as silence, and silence became stew for fear. On the second night of the fast, the bell struck at 4:06 with no hand on the rope, and the lamp in Pike's window flared and went out, and Temperance Hale woke gasping, the taste of stone in her mouth. She dressed in the dark and went to the Baines house without knocking. Nora sat at the table with her hands flat on the wood, knuckles pale, as if she were holding the house down so it didn't float away. Ezra stared at nothing. The twins were awake, eyes bright in the lamplight, not frightened at all. What did it do? Temperance asked, because she had learned the difference between what and who. It asked again, Mercy said. "Which of you is the first?" "And what did you say?" Martha, impatient. "We said we are tired of questions that don't help." Temperance Saturday, what would help? "Someone deciding," Mercy said, and the wrung-out little laugh that followed was older than her body. "But no one wants to be wrong." Pike came in with his coat over his nightshirt. Larkin came behind him with his hair uncombed and his face naked of his usual smirk. Wilkes arrived last. He had taken time to pray. They formed up around the table like a jury too honest to pretend it was impartial. "Then we'll decide," Wilkes said, and the room went tight in the middle because he had taken a step none of them had dared. "We'll go to the sink at dawn," Pike said, surprising himself. He sounded like a man agreeing to walk across ice. "We'll ask whatever speaks to finish what it started or to leave off. We'll answer the question ourselves if we have to." "And if you answer wrong?" Nora asked, voice thin. Pike didn't look at her. "Then we see what justice looks like when it's older than we are. The world keeps its own holy days." Dawn at Widow Shaw's sink felt like a service. Frost edged every blade of dead grass. The stone caps steamed faintly in the new light. Men in heavy coats stood back, hats in nervous hands. The few women there, Temperance, Nora, a widow who said she had nothing left to lose, stood closer, as if their bodies might be required as collateral. Larkin set the metronome on the stone because he needed a bell. Pike laid the compass beside it because he needed north. Wilkes opened his Bible but did not read. Words seemed like moths around a lantern. You could say there were many, but only one light. "Ask," Temperance told the girls, because she trusted them more than any man at that stone. Mercy put her hand in the crack. Martha did not flinch this time. The hum rose, gentle as a hive. The metronome stepped up to match it without being touched. The compass needle tried to sit between north and down and couldn't, and quivered where it was, like a man trying to choose between two doors he already knew were the same room. "Which of you is the first?" The voice did not come to the ears. It came to the bones. Men's hats shook in their hands. "We won't answer that," Martha said. "Ask better." "Which of you is the second?" Mercy laughed. "We won't answer that, either." "What will you answer?" It was patient, not angry. "Ask who we are," Martha said. "Who are you?" Mercy turned her head and looked straight at the place Wilkes stood, and then through him. "We are the same thing twice." "Then why do you wish to be two?" No one had said wish. Ezra made a sound, small and unbrave. Martha's voice went very soft. "Because everyone else is." Silence. Then, the stone shifted. Not much. Enough. The crack widened. Air rose cooler than the air outside. Breath plumed white. Larkin's metronome tick faltered, then held. Out of the dark came a shape like light bent around a thing you can't look at directly. Not a ghost. Not a trick. A zone. A seam where the world was attached to itself. Reverend Wilkes dropped to his knees, not because the thing was holy, but because it made his legs untrustworthy. "Finish it," Mercy whispered. "Finish it how?" Temperance asked, and the question seemed to satisfy the thing. Perhaps questions are a kind of respect. "As one," the voice said. "Or as none." "No," Ezra said. He said it like a man stabbing a table with a knife, not because it would kill anything, but because the sound of steel in wood is sometimes the only answer. The seam wavered. You could imagine a hand reaching out of it. You could imagine a river's surface cut and held vertical. Larkin swayed toward it. Wilkes grabbed his coat and held him like a rope. The seam folded in, then out again, then changed. It became a mirror you could not see yourself in. It became, for one long heartbeat, a third space that belonged to neither child. Martha took one step forward. Mercy took one step back. Every man watching would later swear they had moved at the same time. They chose, though it cannot be said which choice they made. The seam closed like a mouth that had decided not to bite. The hum softened. The frost melted in a neat circle around the capstone as if visited by an early sun. The metronome ticked on, indifferent. "Listen," Pike whispered. They all listened. For the first time since August, the twins' heartbeats were not layered. Martha's beneath Pike's fingers was a quick sparrow. Mercy's was slower, deliberate, a drum you could march to. They were separate. The same children in two different rooms. Martha blinked and giggled suddenly, a sound no one expected in that frozen place. Mercy frowned, not in anger but concentration, and touched her own wrist as if surprised by what she found. "We allowed," she said. Larkin laughed and wept and put his head on the stone. Wilkes stood slowly, every joint warning him that or his murder on the knees. Ezra hugged both girls and then held them away and stared, counting things no one else saw. Temperance closed her eyes and whispered thank you in the particular accent Kentucky uses when gratitude is really a bargain you hope to keep making. The relief lasted until the first stagger. Martha stumbled in the doorway that night and caught herself with a little cry. Mercy, across the room, did not flinch, and that absence hit the room like a plate dropped on a flagstone. The girls slept not as mirror and puppet but as sisters with different bad dreams. In the morning, Martha's spoon clinked a different rhythm against her bowl than Mercy's. It was small. It was staggering. Pike went back to his instruments hungry for numbers that would make a story he could read. The compass behaved. The tuning fork sang when he touched it and shut up when he stopped. The galvanometer, insulted by having been a priest to a god that turned out not to need priests, gave ordinary readings and sulked on the shelf. He should have been relieved. The world had come back into its previous shape, but the tick remained in the corner of his hearing, an extra beat like a footstep on the stair when everyone is sitting at the table. The animals noticed first. Dogs that had slept like sinners now woke and stared at the door. Chickens began to lay their eggs in pairs buried in the same straw as if hiding them from someone counting. A hawk hovering over the pasture flickered, a stutter in its wing beats, and then smoothed out again shamefaced, like a man whose voice has cracked in a hymn. The river rose without rain as if something had leaned its weight on the bed and the water had to make room. Fark's fire glowed under the Baines floor and went out and glowed and went out in a rhythm that did not match the girls. If the cave had closed its mouth, it had not fallen asleep. Pike did the only thing he could think to do. He bought a French metronome from a flatboat man who didn't know what he had and set it in the twins' room and wound it and wound it and wound it so the tick would catch the new hearts and hold them. He sat with the girls and made them clap on 2 and 4, and when they missed he hid his panic behind a smile. He went home with the tick in his head. He lay in bed and felt his own pulse try to climb into the metronome's saddle and ride. If this was mercy, it was a kind that had to be managed. A stranger came through, the kind every river town knows, coat a little too fine, boots a little too clean, a way of talking that suggested he'd learned to say sir, and so he wouldn't have to fight every man he met. He called himself Mr. Grey. He carried a velvet-lined case that looked like it might hide a violin. It did not. It held a silhouette cutter's stand with a little articulated arm and a paper clamp and a set of shears honed thin as gossip. "I'm collecting curiosities," he told Ezra, who was stacking wood like a man building a wall, "for a museum in Philadelphia." "We don't have curiosities," Ezra said. "We have children." Grey smiled with only half his mouth, a habit that made you want to check the hand nearest your pocket. Children grow up. Paper lasts. Ezra shut the door. Grey set up in the tavern anyway, on a little stage nicked by boots, and cut profiles of drunks and widows, making magic out of good wrists and better light. Folks came because folks always do. He asked questions. He got answers. By dusk, he knew more about the twins than a decent man should. He walked to the Baines' place at midnight with his velvet case and a rope and a mouth that had learned how not to pray. He never made it to the porch. Men found him in the morning on the path to Widow Shaw's sink, face up in the frost, hair gone white in a night like milk turned. He was breathing. He would not stop laughing. "There was a third," he told Pike when the doctor leaned over him. "You poor bastards, there was a third." "A third what?" Pike asked, the words dry in his mouth. Grey's eyes rolled, showing more white than iris. "A third girl," he whispered, and then, with a clarity that didn't belong to the deranged, "or a third way." He put his hands over his ears and howled when the church bell told the hour, though it was only 12, not 13. He kept howling until Temperance slapped him hard enough to earn his attention. He met her eyes and shut up and wept. He said he would leave on the next boat. He did not. He walked into the cedar stand behind the general store and was not seen again. Men joked he'd married a cedar and would beget pencils. The joke did not settle well. The winter fever came on a southerly wind that smelled of standing water and onions. It was not cholera. It was not influenza. It was a little of both and something else besides. It laid a hand on a brow and men went down like scythed wheat. Children steamed in their sleep. The doctor's little store of laudanum and faith ran out in the same week, and he rationed both in correct doses to those whose wives cried the loudest. The twins did not sicken. That would have been a mercy of a certain sort. Instead, they went quiet when a fever approached a house. They sat on the floor and stared at the wall and did not speak, and when Temperance rattled a spoon in a cup they did not look up. When the bell gave its 13th chime at 4:06, because it began to do that again, the girls' hands twitched and their eyes filled with tears, and Ezra held them and hated the bell because it was using his children to do its work for it. Pike recorded the hour of each death and found, against his will, that he could map an invisible circle around the twins like ripples from a stone, and where the ripples crossed a household, someone went to the bone orchard. He shut his ledger. He drank. He did not sleep. Temperance fed him coffee and threats until he remembered that men can be useful even when the universe is impolite. One night, the Fox fire brightened under the kitchen boards and Nora woke to the smell of rain on chalk. Mercy's pallet was empty. Martha's, too. Ezra tore the door off the hinges with his hands and ran into the orchard in his shirt. The trees glowed faint green along their bark. The ground smoked faint white in the low spots where lime had been dumped years ago to sweeten the soil. Mercy stood at the far fence, hair down, dress white in the glow. Martha stood 10 paces away, hand outstretched to her sister. Between them, leaves lay in 2 spirals, one turning clockwise, one counter, touching at a single point like a figure 8 pulled into the dirt. "Don't step," Mercy said, calm. Ezra froze. Nora pressed her knuckles to her teeth to hold the scream in where it could do no harm. "What is it?" Temperance asked softly. "A thread," Martha said. "The place to cut it." "Cut it how?" There it was again, Temperance refusing to give the unknown the dignity of being unspeakable. "With choosing," Mercy said. and she sounded so tired that there was a moment where even the bravest in that orchard wanted to nod and lay down in the spirals and sleep. Reverend Wilkes came with his Bible and did not open it. Pike came with his metronome and did not wind it. Larkin came with his hands bare. They stood on the orchard's edge with their hats in their hands like men at a birth and a funeral and, for once, said nothing. Mercy stepped across the narrow neck where the spirals touched. Martha did not. The foxfire dimmed. A wind that didn't move the leaves passed through the orchard like a big hand smoothing hair. In the house, the church bell's rope sagged, then tightened. In the cave, something breathed in and held the breath. The county clerk came 2 days later with extra ledgers and a face like stone. He took receipts. He took Pike's notes with polite theft. He wrote superstitions on a label and shut the box and hammered the lid with 3 clean taps and tied it with cord as if tying a roast. He would later swear he had done right. He would later sit up in bed at 4:06 with his hand on his chest and wonder who had borrowed him for a minute. Spring crawled up out of the river. Men mended fences. The bell behaved for a week and then did not. Mercy learned to braid with her eyes closed, and Martha learned to whistle through her teeth, and Ezra, exhausted by normal, let himself believe that the seam had been sewn up, that whatever the sink wanted had been satisfied by a choice he had never signed on for. It lasted until the day the air turned thin and the flies went mad in the windows. The twins were in the yard with a hoop. They rolled it back and forth once, twice, then again, and on the third roll, the hoop rose from the ground and hung at chest height with no hands on it. A simple miracle is as dangerous as a big one. Children screamed. Nora clapped her hands once, sharp as a gunshot. The hoop fell. Mercy laughed the laugh of a cliff swallow. Martha's face went still as slate. "I'm done," Martha said, in a voice too even. "Done with what?" Ezra asked, terror wearing the mask of anger. "Borrowing," she said. "Returning. Being a door." She walked to the edge of the yard and then past it and then through the cedar stand and onto the ridge, and Mercy followed with a little puzzled sound she made when Martha did something first. Temperance ran. Pike ran. Wilkes ran and prayed out loud, the prayer spilling out of him like he had been saving it for a bad summer. Larkin stayed on the porch with his hands on his knees and the taste of iron in his mouth, because sometimes men know when a story does not need another witness. At Widow Shaw's sink the stone lay flat, flush with the earth. No crack showed. No breath came up. The girls stood side by side and neither reached for the other. Wilkes tried to take their hands. Ezra tried to lift them. Neither adult could move either child an inch. "Ask," Temperance said. "Horse." Mercy shook her head. Martha smiled a little. "We are not asking," she said. "We are telling." "To who?" Pike asked. The way a man asks a cliff to reconsider. "To the counting thing," Mercy said. "To the part of the world that wants to know if we are one or two." "And what are you?" Temperance whispered, tears running cold as rain down her cheeks. Martha looked at Mercy. Mercy looked at Martha. If either had said one, it would have been a kind of erasure. If either had said two, it would have been a defeat. There is a third word, and it doesn't exist in English yet. It might not exist anywhere. "We are enough," Martha said. Mercy nodded. "We are finished." The ground didn't open. The stone didn't move. The hum did not swell. Nothing happened in a way that made the hairs on every arm stand up. Then, very gently, as if pressure were being released from under the earth, a warmth rose. The girls closed their eyes, breathed once together, and stepped back at the same time, 2 steps, 3, until they stood in the cedar shadow. Ezra reached out. Martha took his hand. Mercy did not. Ezra's throat clicked. He reached the other hand. Mercy took it. The bell in town gave one clean single note, and then, insolently, a 13th that was not jagged or thin but pure and round, as if the bell had been repaired while no one was looking. They walk home. The hoop rolled like a hoop. The foxfire did not come. The metronome, unwound, made no sound. For 3 days, nothing broke or bled or bent. On the 4th day, a letter arrived from Boston addressed to Pike, from a man who had never been to Kentucky and never would, who had read Larkin's notes and scoffed and sent along an article on twins who could speak each other's thoughts across a room. Pike read it and tossed it in the stove and watched the paper blacken and curl and let himself laugh for the first time in a month. Years later, men would say they remembered the twins differently. Some said one married a cooper in Bardstown and had sons who never lost at marbles. Some said one drowned in the river and the other carried her shadow for the rest of her life like a bruise. Some said they both moved west and became midwives who could stop a hemorrhage with their hands. Temperance Hale never said. Reverend Wilkes never preached on it. Dr. Pike lived long enough to see a telegraph wire strung along the road and wept when he heard the first click. We were the wrong tools, he said, and no one knew if he meant the town or the century. As for the records, the clerk kept his promise. Boxes labeled superstitions slept under the county ledgers. When the courthouse burned a generation later, men carried out the cattle rolls and the tax books and let the superstition boxes char to ash. That would be a tidy end if we were the kind of show that made every story safe. But we aren't, and the world isn't. Because somewhere under the cedars the limestone still hums on cold nights. On the longest night of the year, if you stand behind the church and listen, not with your ears, but with the place your fear lives, you can hear a second bell answer the first, not repeating, replying. And once, when a curious boy pried up a kitchen board in the old Baines place, he found a glass marble with a twist of white in it, and when he rolled it on the floor it darted decisively to the exact center between where his 2 feet stood and then would not move, as if that were the only honest place for it to rest. What do you think happened on that ridge? Were the Baines twins one soul folded twice, or were they 2 souls who refused a false choice? Did Ashford Hollow witness a miracle, or a rule we don't have words for yet? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to hear the stories your town sealed, the whispers your grandparents told but your county clerks tried to forget. If you want more buried histories, more midnight science the textbooks skip, subscribe to Tales Never Told and tap the bell so the next secret finds you first. Share this with someone who thinks the world is already measured. And remember, some doors make more sense closed, but the knocking you hear, it isn't always from the other side. It might be the echo coming back with an answer.